Having performed a number of assessments, I've determined, at least from this chart here, which is called the Hermann Brain Dominance Instrument, I've determined that my thinking preferences really fall somewhere between the blue and the yellow, with slightly more dominance on the blue side. So for all intents and purposes, although we exhibit a number of these different color hemispheres and thinking styles, typically one aspect tends to dominate over the others. Rarely are we ever exactly balanced in all domains. I typically have a balanced bias towards the intellectual and the analytical. So it would seem I need to work on things like being more relational or perhaps being more practical, organized, sequential, planned, etc. So my thinking preference is logical, analytical, fact-based, and quantitative. Hardly surprising given I did an undergrad degree in science. So I'm blue for all intents and purposes. I'm going to use this blue to make a stylistic choice in how I handle my headshot. So I'm just going to jump over to Photoshop. There I am. And I'm going to use a technique called duotoning. In order to duotone, you're layering one color plus black, typically, to create a two-toned image. So first of all, I'm going to go to the image menu in Photoshop, and I'm going to change the mode to grayscale. And that discards all the color information. It converts it to a grayscale. And now once it's a grayscale, I can choose to go to image mode and then duotone that image. When I select duotone, you'll notice that it's got the black in there for the grayscale, and it's currently a monotone image. I would select duotone to add in a second color layer. So you'll notice there are two swatches here and a field to name that swatch, but if I click on that swatch, I get access to a color picker. So from within here, I can choose the color blue, and just to remind myself of what that blue looks like, I'm just going to look back here. Okay, it's kind of a lighter blue. And so now from that color picker, I will choose that lighter blue, perhaps in around there. Just select it in that field of color. Maybe exaggerate it a little bit more. Click OK. You'll notice it's now comprised of two colors. It's a duotone, black plus this custom color. Now what you'll also notice is these graphs here, and these are graphs of y equals x. It's called a normal graph. Well, we can manipulate these graphs by bending them and changing the distribution of color. So what I'm doing is where the image areas are darker, I'm adding more blue ink. Or conversely, if I pull it down this way, it's flipping that arrangement. In fact, if I were to redraw this thing back to front, I could create what's called a curve with a negative slope. And you can see that the image is starting to look like what you would consider a negative in photography. And that negative comes from the fact that the slope of that line is running in an opposite direction, in a negative direction. So I'm just going to hold the Option key down there. Oh, I just hit the Cancel key rather. I'm just going to keep it fairly normal. I'll boost it a little bit in the darker end of the spectrum. And then I'll just click OK. So I've created a duotone. It's telling me I need to give this name, so I'll call that blue. And now that I have this duotone, I'm going to save this. Duotones are very specific types of files, and they can only really be saved either in a native Photoshop format or they can be saved in EPS for encapsulated PostScript. But we just need an RGB version of this. So I'm just going to take this thing and switch it back from duotone back to RGB. and it just converts it back from being a two-colored image, black plus blue, to a three-color image using additive color, red, green, and blue. It's a little bit technical right now. I don't expect you to know all of this stuff, but we now have what's called an RGB image that can be used on the web. So I can now save this. I can say save for web. It's showing me here that my image is far too large. So I'm just going to cancel this. And the reason for that is, if we look in here, initially in the first video I was saying make sure that you specify the image size as 276 pixels. And here I neglected to do that, and it's done it in inches. So I'm just going to convert that to pixels, px. That's why it had such an enormous image there. And then that should make all the difference in the world. Look at the tiny little image there now. So that image is large enough for us to use for profiling on the web. And I'm using this duotone blue image of myself to tell people in my social network a little something without verbalizing it, telling them a little something about my thinking preferences. So if you were a yellow thinker, if we go back to our chart, you would do a yellow and black duotone. If you were a red thinker, a red and black. And if you were a green type of thinker, you would do a green and black duotone. So we save this thing, getting ready to save it. And we'll say File, Save for Web. Notice we're not getting that message anymore. We just choose JPEG as our output format. And we'll use JPEG high quality. Then we'll click Save, and it wants us to give this thing a name. Now remember, we use the naming convention, last name, all lowercase, underscore, first name, all lowercase, underscore, headshot, and the software should put in that three-letter extension that identifies it as a JPEG. And then of course you choose where you're going to save this to. If you have a drive, you could save it to a drive, or in this case, I'm just going to save it to my desktop. And save it. And now I've got a headshot that I can post up onto our open network or anywhere else for that matter. And it's going to tell you that I'm a blue thinker.